Hello everyone, my name is David Kiernan. I'm a Curriculum Officer at NCFE, and you're very welcome to this webinar for the Unit 3 of the Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Award in Graphic Design. And I'm joined today by Leslie Davis, one of our external quality assurers and a subject specialist in graphic design. And the plan for today's webinar is to first of all give an overview of this VCert qualification, as for some people on here, it might be very new to them. I'm also going to give you an update in regards to our current COVID-19 response. There's going to be a summary of the learning outcomes and grading descriptors for Unit 3 as well. So Learning Outcome 1, Learning Outcome 2, and Learning Outcome 3. We're going to look at some examples of learner work. And finally, to address any questions that you may have. But please, throughout this entire webinar, do put any questions into the question box. Hopefully you should be able to see that on the control panel there, the question box. And you should also actually be able to access the handouts. So you should be able to download from the handout section all the slides that are presented in this webinar. That will include the learner's work. So that'll be very, very useful to have. But first, just like to begin with a poll. How do you currently feel about the Unit 3 of graphic design in terms of the assessing, the grading, and so on? So from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not too confident, 10 being very confident, where would you put yourself at the minute? So hopefully you can see that poll on screen. Got about half the votes in at the minute. I'll just wait 20 more seconds or so. It looks like the majority are in the 5 to 6 range, about 75% exactly in the 5 to 6 range, 25% in the 7 to 9 range. So mid to highish for most people. 80% in the 5 to 6 range now, 20% in 7 to 8. Okay. Well, hopefully this webinar will help to get you a bit more confident in terms of the approach to the Unit 3 of graphic design. So as I mentioned to begin with, though, I do want to provide a little overview of this qualification in case it might be brand new to some people here. There might even be some people who aren't currently delivering this qualification and just want a brief overview. And it will be a brief overview. If you need a more comprehensive overview of the Level 1 and Level 2 technical awards, then we do have induction webinars for that you can sign up for, or they are available to view on our YouTube channel. But first, the Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Award in Graphic Design, it does consist of 2 parts. The external assessment, which is worth 50%, and the internally assessed coursework, also worth 50%. Graphic design has got 4 units, and each unit is internally assessed with the coursework. The first 3 units in the specification, they will also be externally assessed with the invigilated external assessment. And learners are entitled to 1 resubmission of the internally assessed coursework following the EQA visit. One thing to note though, if your learners are on the Level 2 Technical Award in Graphic Design, they will need to achieve a minimum of a Level 2 pass in each internal assessment and in the external assessment in order to achieve that Level 2 overall. If it looks likely that they may not achieve that, you may want to re-register them onto the Level 1 course instead. QualHub is going to be your primary go-to for resources, the specification, assessments, regulations, and so much more. So you can either begin by typing in your full qualification. You can filter for VCert qualifications as well. But one of the key things you'll find on your page that you might find very useful is assignments. So for the internally assessed coursework, we do actually have some assignments that are ready for you to use when you're on your graphic design QualHub page. So On there, there's the support materials containing specification, teaching materials containing PowerPoints and lesson plans, but the internally assessment sample tasks, they can be quite useful for you to use. So there's an assignment for each unit 1, 2, 3, and 4, each of the internally assessed units. You might want to change some aspects of the scenario to make it more suitably contextualized for your learners. In these assignments that we have ready for you to go, the first thing that you'll see on the brief is going to be the scenario. And as I mentioned, you might want to change this to make it better for your learners, but it is designed to give a real life situation in order to help set the assignment in context. After that, the assignment gives some further details on the specific information that should be included. And then the way the evidence can be presented. And we've tried to keep this as open as possible to appeal to many different types of learners. And then also on the following page, we have the grading descriptors. And this is what the learners will see, and this is what they need to achieve in order to get a grade. And that's what the assessor is going to be using when marking the assignment. It's what the external quality assurer is going to be checking when they're reviewing the work as well. So they're the grading descriptors, probably the most important part of the assignment. When it comes to grading a unit will consist of 3 learning outcomes, and each learning outcome is graded. So to get a pass in the unit, the learner needs to achieve a minimum of a pass in each learning outcome. So they have to demonstrate that same level of competency in each learning outcome if we're to judge the unit to be at that level of competency. So if they get a pass in one outcome, as we can see in this example, and merits in the other 2 outcomes, then the final grade, got a pass, merit, the final grade for the unit is still a pass. They need to have all learning outcomes to be at a merit in order to judge the unit as a whole to be at a merit. This isn't the case, thankfully, when it comes to combining all the units together. There is compensatory grading when we're looking at all 4 units fully completed. But within a single unit, it's the lowest grade they get in a learning outcome would be their final grade for that unit overall. Now, I do want to provide a little update regarding COVID-19, especially if there's anyone here who is currently delivering this qualification, whether it's with year 10, year 11, you undoubtedly will probably have been affected to some extent by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I want to provide an update on the current situation as it is. We are expecting this week that Ofqual will publish the final consultation, or what's called the VCRF, Vocational and Technical Qualification Contingency Regulatory Framework. That is to be published at some point this week, and we will then have a better idea and know exactly how the rest of the year will go. This qualification, though, there are some things I will be able to tell you. This qualification is in scope for teacher assessed grades, or tags. But do try and make sure that any internal assessments do continue wherever possible. The external assessment for this academic year, it has been cancelled. So they would have to be assessed via a teacher assessed grades. Now, there is one thing you should do though. If your learners, by the way, if they already have an external assessment done and they have a banked grade, that's fine. You don't need to submit a teacher assessed grade. You can, if they were entitled to a resit, then you may want to submit a teacher assessed grade. But if they do already have a banked external assessment grade where they already sat it and they have a result, you don't need to submit one, unless, as I mentioned, that was for a resit. If you are going to be submitting a teacher assessed grade for the external assessment, do make sure you book them on to the external assessment that they would have sat. No teacher assessed grade for an external assessment can actually be submitted to us unless they're actually booked onto the assessment. The assessment isn't taking place. I just want to confirm that there is no external assessment this year. It is cancelled, but you still need to book them onto that assessment window in order to submit the tag. Now, we will be asking for any teacher assessed grades, any tags on an assessment level rather than a qualification level. So in other words, you'll be letting us know the tag for the external assessment and then a tag for each internal assessment separately, rather than an overall teacher assessed grade for the entire qualification. So you won't be saying for the graphic design qualification, the learner has a level 2 pass. You won't be doing that. You'll be telling us instead for the graphic design for the external assessment, they have a level 2 pass. For unit 1, they have a level 2 merit, whatever it happens to be. Of course, there are some qualifications or some units that learners might have managed to complete as normal, in which case a tag is not required. So we do understand that there may be a mix within a center of teacher assessed grades and non-teacher assessed grades. That's absolutely fine. The system will allow you to submit both, any business as usual ones, I suppose, any normal submission ones, or any teacher assessed grade submission ones. Now, for anyone who is currently got mid-flight learners, that they are considered learners who are in the first year of a 2-year course, such as year 10s, those learners can actually have teacher assessed grades submitted as well. And those teacher assessed grades would be for any assessments they would have usually completed this academic year. The key thing is any teacher assessed grades, whether it's for the external assessment, for any of the internal units, they should be based on evidence that you have. So this can be from any already completed or banked assessments that have been done. Could be evidence from other assessment activities, maybe mock exams, teacher conducted formative assessment stuff, internal assessment activity, things like that. Any classwork or homework possibly as well completed by the learners. It has to be based on some evidence that you can make a judgment on those units or the external assessment. Now, as I have mentioned there, we are expecting that off-call consultation to be available at some point this week, and in anticipation of that, we have got some webinars planned for next week. So if you just went to ncfe.org.uk, right away you see the big COVID-19 response bit. I'm going to click into there just to read some more. And along the side, just scroll down here, you will see this bit here that says support. Our support for you, as you can see here on the right. If you click into this bit, this is where you'll be able to sign up to these webinars that are happening next week. In terms of vCerts, there is a webinar on April 1st at 12 o'clock for vCerts, talking about teacher assessed grade, the approach to awarding vCerts. Here they are at the side in this box here. There also is another webinar about support for centres, giving more information around the tag guidance and making judgments on assessments. So you will be able to sign up to these here. Approach to awarding for vCerts and support for centres, tag guidance, and making judgments on tags. They're probably the two most useful ones. When you do go to register, let's say this vCert one, it will ask you, do you have a question that you would like to be addressed in this webinar? So if there's any questions that you would want answered, do put it in there, that we will be able to address those questions during the webinar. So they would have to be submitted to us by, I believe it's this coming Monday, I think that's the 29th. So do sign up and do get registered if you're interested in this. It'll be very useful to help inform you for the rest of the year what the approach is going to be, what the outcome of the off-call consultation is. Now, just before I move on, I'm going to have a look here to see if there's a question. There's one question that's come in. Will these be recorded so you can listen to them later? Absolutely. This webinar will be that I'm currently doing, as will the other ones. Yes, the approach to awarding ones, they will be recorded. They will be placed on our YouTube channel as well. So you can absolutely get access to them. Okay. So doesn't seem to be any further questions at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Leslie Davis, our subject specialist and EQA for graphic design. We'll be able to talk through some of the more specific details to do with the Unit 3 work.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone, and welcome this afternoon. It's good to have you here. I will just put a reminder before we start to make sure that you do download the slides from this presentation, as David instructed at the start, to be really useful. I'm conscious of time, and although these things have been planned quite well to fit into the hour slot, it's very useful when you start to actually want to look at the samples of learner work at the end of this presentation, because I tend to go through it quite quickly, and I do talk about where the learners have evidenced certain criteria, but it would be useful for you to have access to them yourselves, and then you can look next to the qualification specification together with the assessment criteria and go through them in detail in your own time. So just a reminder to make sure you download those slides before you leave today. So today we're going to be looking at Unit 3. And Unit 3 is responding to a graphic design brief. And there's 3 learning outcomes for this. So we've got understand the requirements of a graphic design brief. We've got learning outcome 2, produce their final graphic design idea. And learning outcome 3, review how they have met the brief. So there are the 3 learning outcomes for this unit. The first one we'll look at is learning outcome 1, and there's 2 areas here that learners need to demonstrate their understanding. The first being responding to a brief, and the second developing ideas in response to that brief. So assessors must provide learners with a design brief for this unit. Absolutely essential. And David did point out to some of the resources on the Qual Hub before regarding internal assessment tasks, which is what they are called on the Qual Hub for the resources for this, and that's where you'll find an assignment brief for this unit. So again, it's an example. It's by no means mandatory that you use this, but it's a good template to start with. And again, you could change the scenario to meet your learners cohort. So it's a good starting point, but they must, if you don't use that template, really important that you devise some sort of design brief for this unit that learners can respond to. So here we can see the level 2 assessment criteria. So we've got pass, merit and distinction. So a pass, what we're looking for is some. So you can see that in the gradient descriptor, the word some is underlined and in bold. For merit, what we're looking for is all the information presented in the design brief, and distinction is about making accurate conclusions, weighing up all the information. So what we'd expect here, and then the example column on the right here gives you a little bit of context of what this might look like in the student's evidence. So what we'd be expecting here is for the learners to be presented with a design brief, and then they've actually made some interpretations and how they've used that information extracted from the design brief to develop their ideas. And often a good way to evidence this is students sometimes have a printout of the design brief and they write notes on that. Some learners who are working digitally will have a screenshot and they'll sort of annotate their own notes. Sometimes they might want to present it in a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document with some comments. But it's any format really flexible in the format of evidence. But as long as the assessor can see how they've used that brief to actually analyse the information and take that forward into developing their own ideas. And again, the ideas developed can also be a mix of some annotations that sort of link back to the brief. So for example, it could be a brief that has a particular audience targeted. So learners might have some visual, a sketch pad or design sheet, and it might start to have some annotations there of how they've actually used that information to develop the ideas. So they might say, I've used a particular colour scheme, etc., to develop ideas that are, relevant for that particular information on the design brief. And then just a note on distinction here. So for a pass, again, so it could be some information of that brief. It'd have to be relevant information there. A merit would be looking for all of the information. So there might be, it's really important that the assessor, when they're writing the brief here, that they don't overload the learners with too much information, because they, for a merit, they have to use all the information. But also there should be, shouldn't be very limited information to support the student here to be able to use that brief effectively. And then for a distinction, what we'd be looking for is weighing up. So we'd be looking for some evaluation here of the information that's being provided. So for some information for a pass, all for a merit, and then some evaluation of that evidence for a distinction. And that's at level 2 here. And then here we can see the level 1 criteria, and it's the same approach. So learners need to do the same. They need to use the brief, and it can be the same brief as well for your level 1 and level 2 learners. And it would be the same approach. They would use the design brief to develop ideas in response to that brief. However, the evidence expected here is at a much lower demand. So for a pass, we'd be looking for some general conclusions. Sometimes at a pass at level 1, we see learners maybe quite typically just repeating information that's been provided to them on the assignment brief. So, they might not really be able to show any exploration of that. They may very much just sort of repeat information that they've been given, but they're still using it to develop ideas. For merit, some simple conclusions, so we'd be expecting a little bit more there. Again, it still needs to be relevant information, so it still needs to be taken from that brief. And then for a distinction, we'd be looking for some, maybe some brief notes, some very straightforward bullet points or lists here that they can make some links to the brief that they've been given. And it might just be very sort of one sentence that they've been able to relate. For example, that we used before, colour scheme or etc. So that's how learning outcome 1 would look. I'm just going to check back with David to see if there's any questions for this learning outcome. Does it make sense to sort of answer them as we go along? Has there been any questions, David, for learning outcome 1?
Sorry, I forgot I was still muted. Yes, I do indeed. What specifically do they need to evaluate about the brief? Okay, so they might evaluate whatever information that sorry, I'll just add to that. Sorry, I didn't realise this was part 2. Also, what specifically they need to evaluate about the brief for distinction level 2? Yeah, okay, so for distinction level 2 students, this is where we're looking, and the descriptor actually says weighing up information, okay? So we wouldn't be looking for a student who just sort of is quite a literal response, if you like. What we're looking for here is some analysis and an evaluation. So what does the target audience, for example, are they given any specific specifications to work to? This is where we'll be looking for the student to say, okay, I could maybe do this idea, an idea 1 for the development. However, this might not meet the target audience. So again, they're relating it back to some information in the brief. So the second alternative idea might relate better to the target audience because of such and such. However, the brief might say, I have maybe a limited time of 4 weeks to complete this. So then they'd be looking at whether they'd be weighing up that information, whether what their intention is, what they want to do, are they able to do that within the 4 weeks? So this is where they're actually starting to look at all the information that they've been given in the brief and how the best they can actually respond to that based on resources, based on time, based on skill sets that they have.
that type of thing. So we'd be looking for more of a weighing up of all the information based on their own current situation.
Yeah, that's all the questions for now. Yeah,
okay,
I'll let you fire ahead.
Okay, so we'll move on to learning outcome 2. And learning outcome 2 is the practical production stage. So this is where learners will produce their final graphic design idea. And this must be the idea developed in learning outcome 1. So there should be a natural progression here from the brief, the developed ideas in learning outcome 1 to actually what they take forward to produce in learning outcome 2. And there's 2 areas that they need to demonstrate here, and that's the technical skills and the effective use of resources. So there's sort of 2 parts to the evidence here. There's a selection process of how learners actually select the resources that they will need to use to produce their final idea. And then also right the way through this assessment criteria is how this accurately and most relevantly reflects this design brief. So the design brief, again, to reiterate, is absolutely key here. And for a pass, the developed idea would be accurate and relevant to meeting the brief. And again, I'm just reading this from the exemplification on the right column here. The learner will show selection and application of technical skills. And again, these need to be relevant technical skills and effective use of resources in the execution of the final graphic design idea. Now, learners can work sort of with physical resources, or they can work purely digital, or they could do a combination of both here. So it's more about process. There's no sort of indication whether they have to use digital resources here, because that's quite a question that we get quite a lot here. So whatever resources they choose to use is fine, but there is some evidence required for the selection process and demonstration of technical skill in the production of the final outcome. And then looking at the merit, we've got the developed idea will be mostly accurate and relevant. Again, so it's looking a bit how it's responded to the information of the brief. The learner will show effective selection and application of technical skills and effective use of resources. I mean, a good way to evidence this is, again, it could be screenshots or it could be annotations on a design board or in a sketch pad. And here we'd be looking at things like, as the criteria moves through past merit distinction, we'd be looking for annotations to show how the learner has made decisions regarding these resources and the technical skills that they've decided to use or experiment with. And it could be some very quite straightforward but informative annotations of the decisions that they've made in order to produce their final idea based on that development in learning outcome 1. And then for distinction, again, we'll be looking at that bottom sentence here in the example on the right-hand column. There's about consistency with the application throughout the production of the final idea here. So, there should be quite a obvious sort of flow from their intention from learning outcome 1 to right through to their idea, the final outcome that they produce in learning outcome 2. And again, some annotation or other way, it doesn't have to be written. They might want to do a presentation, which is fine. They may want to actually present the final idea and talk their way through to their peers or to their tutor of what they did and how they created the final idea, and that's absolutely fine. So, it just doesn't have to be written. That's just one way, one quite common way that students do this, through annotation. And then looking at the level 1 criteria, again, it's the same approach here. This is where students will show some practical application, but the demand is much lower, and it may not consider sort of alternative ideas and approaches. It may not have as much as experimentation, maybe as we'd expect at level 2. So there might be some limited skill development here. And the difference here is we've got a pass uses relevant technical skills. So there still has to be some relevance. For a merit, we've got uses a combination of relevant technical skills. So we'd be expecting that combination there, so more than one technical skill demonstrated. And for distinction, there's a combination of skills, equipment, materials, and processes. So a little bit more broader evidence for a distinction at level 1. And again, it might still be quite a basic response here at level 1. And again, you can still see words, things like in merit, we can see for the exemplification, inconsistency, there might be some inaccuracies there, or there might be very basic and limited evidence of that technical skill development. And there may be very limited selection process there that might not be wholly accurate or appropriate. And I'll just pause for some questions, if there's any questions on learning outcome 2.
Just having a look now. I don't think there no questions for that one. So
okay, I think learning outcome 2 is usually the learning outcome that most assessors and learners probably are most comfortable with, because it is that practical application. Okay, so we'll move on to learning outcome 3. So this final learning outcome is regarding the review of how they met the brief. So really important, but sometimes always, well, not always, but sometimes lots of the time, especially for new centres and new assessors, it can be misinterpreted. So this isn't an evaluation of what sort of went well and didn't go so well with the actual process, but this must be a review on how they met the brief. And then there's quite a bit of content here. So there's 4 bullet points to be covered within this review for level 2, which is the final outcome, how the final outcomes met the brief, the purpose and the impact of the graphic design, again, how with response to the brief and the information they were presented with, how they've used resources, and then this final bullet point, what went well and not so well, that is an additional criteria for the review for level 2 only. So that's not required for level 1. So looking at the level 2 assessment criteria, so even at level 2, it's a review. It's not an in-depth evaluation. So even at a distinction, the descriptor is still describes. Okay, so at a pass, merit, and distinction, it's only looking for description. However, we're looking for a description that covers as much of those bullet points as possible. So you'll see for a pass, we've got describes the processes involved and identifies some aspects. So the aspects are those bullet points that we've just previously looked at. A merit is describes processes involved and identifies what went well and not so well. And again, at distinction, you're describing for all of those processes there. And the difference you'll see with the distinction is on the example text on the right column, they must actually include development for improvement of their graphic design. So it's in the distinction criteria. So not only did they describe the processes involved and identify what went well, not so well, they must identify opportunities for development, for improvement. So without that additional evidence, they wouldn't be able to achieve higher than a merit there. Now, a good way for centres to evidence this can be within the annotations that were provided for learning outcome 2. So some learners can be quite good at maybe annotating the sketch pads, or they might do a presentation in PowerPoint and they might write a little bit of what they've done, how they've created their final outcome. They can also be hitting this learning outcome 3 assessment criteria there if they're actually describing processes at the same time, which sort of goes, hand in hand. So that usually works quite well for centres to do that And again, you know, if they're providing those, if the evidence is there within the annotations or within their presentation, then there's no reason why they would have to do a separate review for learning outcome 3. If the evidence is there as part of the practical application in the producing the final outcome for learning outcome 2, then that's fine to assess this learning outcome as well at the same time. And then moving on to the level 1 criteria, again, same approach, but they wouldn't be looking for that additional bullet point at the start of these few slides. So they'll need to identify some of what's happened, identify what's happened for merit, so a little bit more of those 3 bullet points there. So if identify some of what happened for a pass, they might just do 1 or 2. For a merit, they would include the 3. But again, it's still identify. We're not looking for a great deal of text and writing here. And for distinction, identifies what happens with an overall conclusion, whether they've met the brief. And again, even for identify, this can be quite basic notes, it can be bulleted, it can be lists, it can be bullet points. If they decide to do a presentation, you know, this could be a verbal confirmation as well at level 1. So we're not looking for a great deal of writing here. That's just one way that students might do it. And the same approach if they wanted to do this as part of the annotations or their design notes that they do when they're creating their outcome for learning outcome 2, then that's absolutely fine. And then before we move on, I'll just pause for any questions there.
No other questions seem to have come in at the minute.
Okay, great.
Oh, hang on, actually, sorry, there is, just as I said that. Is there a requirement to experiment with graphic design components?
Not, well, the graphic design components will have been covered in the introductory unit 1. They will also demonstrate some of that in unit 2. You would expect them to know these by this stage because it's unit 3. However, they're not actually assessed on each component, if that makes sense. So this is more about the process of them taking that knowledge and understanding of knowing the components and be able to use those in response to a brief. So this unit is very much focused on getting the students prepared for the external assessment, because the external assessment involves learners responding to a brief that's set as part of the exam, the external assessment. So this unit is very much on preparing learners how to interpret information from a brief, develop ideas in response to that brief and create a final outcome. So although we'd expect those graphic design components to be evident there because they're actually, you know, they're producing a piece of graphic design work, they're not assessed in their individual sense. So they're not going to be sort of checked off in that way. It's very much a holistic process here, but it's more about being given a brief, develop ideas, response to the brief, produce a final outcome and review. Is that the only question, David?
Yep, that seems to be it.
Okay, great. So we'll look at the first piece of learning work, which is a pass. Now this student got a pass for learning outcome 1, a pass for learning outcome 2 and a pass for learning outcome 3. And if you remember earlier on in the slides, every learning outcome must achieve a pass in order to get an overall grade of a pass. So for example, if a student didn't do so well on the review for learning outcomes 3 and they didn't meet that pass criteria, then they wouldn't be able to have a pass for the unit. So they must have a pass for learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. Oh, sorry, I think I've jumped a little bit ahead there. Just going to go back. Sorry, David, I think I might have jumped ahead there. You might have to take me back. Thank you. Thanks very much. So this is the first page of the learner's work. Again, so what they've done is they've used the assignment brief that they've been presented with, and they've actually just started to summarise that information here. And again, this is a good example how they've actually started to put some annotations here. I've actually given some a little bit of context to what they presented in their PowerPoint. So they've evidenced some research here of different music genres. Again, they've continued to explore different music genres based on the project brief. And they've started to look at some images here. Here they've started to select images they could use in a mood board, so a visual representation of their ideas. And again, they've just got some basic annotations here. And here they've started to undertake some analysis of existing products. So this is valid for research, but it's worth mentioning here that it's not mandatory, it's not a requirement. This is just one particular approach of this learner. But again, if it's relevant for research, then they can include it. And they've actually tried to use this to show how they've actually used this in the development. So here they've actually started to screenshot some of the development of their final idea. And in this stage, they've started to create an additional CD stand. Again, it's not a requirement. This is just one approach. Again, they've got some development of the final idea with some useful annotations. So they've got some hand-drawn sketches as well as some digital development. And again, they've started to, which is useful because we can start to see that they've got some alternative ideas here. And sometimes a very basic alternative idea, very basic change and modification. But I think it's useful to see that they've started to consider more than one approach here. And then they've got their final response. And they've got some review there on the right. And I think this student, I think it would be accurate to say that there's some ongoing review with this particular student because all throughout their idea development, they've got these annotations, which is useful to see the review. And again, they've got a final review here. So they've started to think about difficulties and challenges. Again, they start straight away with how they've met client requirements. So again, just to remind that Learn Outcome 3 is a review of how the outcome has met the brief. So moving on to the merit. And again, you will have more time to look through these in your own time once you download the slides. So this student actually got a distinction for Learning Outcome 1, a distinction for Learning Outcome 2, however, a merit for Learning Outcome 3. So a good example to illustrate how the assessment criteria can be limited for the unit if they didn't achieve the distinction for one of the learning outcomes. Sorry, David, I think I've skipped ahead again there. Might have to just go back to the start. Apologies, the controls don't seem to be quite working on mine, so I just needed to.
Sorry, hopefully we'll get you sorted.
I think the page starts with.
It seems to be the first bit on the
That's the
slide,
one,
I think. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the student here, as mentioned, they got a merit for learning outcome 1. Sorry, a distinction for learning outcome 1, distinction for learning outcome 2, and a merit for learning outcome 3. So here we can see that the project brief that learners have been presented with, and again, they've started to extract all information, which would be for merit, in the surrounding shapes, how they've decided to present this, who the client is, they've got accurate requirements of a mock-up, they've fused together 2 genres, which is what the brief has asked it to do, and that the design must include image and text. So they've started to weigh up the information here. And here they are continuing to explore different genres that they could use. And they do this across a couple of slides here. And here they've started to select images. So if you remember, there should be some selection process evident within the students' work. So they've started to have some visual representation of their ideas. And then what's interesting here is there is evidence now. So even though we're sort of quite a few slides into the presentation, there's actually some evidence here for learning outcome 1. So even though that first slide might have only summarised all of the information which would essentially award a merit, the student can now achieve distinction because there's further evidence here as the learner is weighing up the information of the brief with this task analysis. So they've got much more detail here of how you've got things like costs, how long it'll take. So they've really started to weigh up the information here and how they can actually produce a relevant and realistic response. So again, the evidence might not be in one particular part of the presentation. So from an assessor point of view, if the evidence is there, you know, please award it. It doesn't have to be sort of task 1, task 2, task 3. It's a holistic approach of how they've responded. And then we've got some more product analysis here. So they've gone into some further detail. And again, they've added some additional evidence. Again, this isn't, it looks like additional research. It does fit in with the brief. But again, this is one approach from this particular centre and learner. And then there's lots of valid experimentation here in 2D design. And they've got some informative annotations here. Again, showing technical skills and what they've done. So, you know, what techniques they've chosen. Develop the idea further here for a CD case. And they've done a mock-up for a CD stand here for their design. And then they've got some of their hand-drawn ideas, so their initial ideas here in response to the research and the brief. And again, very simple labelling, idea 1 and idea 2, but with some justification, shows that there has been more than one approach explored. And idea 3 and idea 4, some further development. using different skills. Again, this has got some explanation here and what software. They've used Photoshop as well as Fireworks here. And then they've got an evaluation here. Now, the evaluation is separate in this particular learner. And it is quite detailed, and there is some ongoing evaluation as well, ongoing review, I should say. However, it does not state any opportunities for improvement here, so it cannot be awarded a distinction for Learning Outcomes 3. So if the opportunities for improvement had either been stated here or elsewhere in the evidence, so it could have been in the annotations, then a distinction could have been awarded. So overall, this learner achieved a merit for the unit, as Learning Outcomes 3 has limited the overall grade. So that's the end of for that piece of work in particular. So I hope they were both useful, especially the second piece, just to show how the overall units grades are calculated. So I don't know if you've got any questions, David?
Yeah, there are some questions. Just while I look at them, I'm going to launch this poll. Just
Okay.
how do you currently feel with regards to the assessing and grading of Unit 3 now? Hopefully this has helped give you some further ideas, learner evidence and so on. So just while that poll's launched, I'll have a look here. Question here, would these examples get the same grade in the external assessment?
Very difficult to say because external assessment is in different conditions. So, you know, it's sort of an example of what the level, if you like, it would have the same sort of characteristics that we'd be looking for, but it's a different mark scheme used for the external assessment. So it's quite a difficult answer there, because they're under different conditions. And also the mark scheme is different to those internal assessment criteria for this unit.
You would certainly, if you're thinking in terms of using these components like Unit 1, 2 and 3, Sarah, for evidence to make a teacher assessed grade for the external assessment, you certainly could. And
Yes.
I don't think any EQA or NCFE ourselves that would argue with you basing any judgments on internal assessments to help you come to a grade for external assessments. I don't know if that's the way you're thinking about it, Sarah. Sorry, go ahead, Leslie.
No, I was just saying I completely agree. So I think these examples, you know, they're sort of a good benchmark. They're not going to be exactly, because again, it's a different assessment criteria, but the process is there. So there'd be no reason why you couldn't use students' evidence from the internal assessed units. In fact, I don't really know. That's probably the best approach, really, the best practice approach to do that, to come up with a tag for external assessment, if that's what you're thinking.
It certainly seems to be. She says, yes, thank you. So I'm guessing that is the approach she was thinking, and absolutely a very good, sensible approach. I'll just stop that poll now.
Yeah. So just before you, while it's reminding me, David, because sometimes not everybody knows about the resources on Qual Hub, and there is actually some examples of assessed learner work on the Qual Hub as well. In the same place where David shown at the start for the internal assessment task examples, there is some examples of assessed learner work as well, and there's quite a lot of detailed commentary, sort of EQA commentary that goes with those. So they're definitely worth a look at if you haven't looked at those, to help you.
It looks like we've got most people now are 80% anyways are in the 8 to 7 range in terms of confidence, which is good. It looks like some have gone to the 3 to 4 range. Please put questions in the question box if there's anything that you're not sure about that you would like us to address now. That's why we're here doing this session, and we have 5 more minutes left, so do pop those questions in. And just as Leslie just mentioned regarding the extra resources, I'll show you where that is on the Qual Hub page. So, and by the way, as I mentioned, when you're on the starting page, you can write in the full qualification title in here, or if you did just search for graphic design itself, it does come up with the suggestions. You can see level 1 technical award in graphic design, the level 2 technical award in graphic design. But on the Qual Hub page, when we scroll down, we have the support materials, so the specification, and in the assessment materials, as Leslie was mentioning, we do have some, we have a sample portfolio here, and there is comments by an external quality assurer on there, justifying different grades and so on.
I mean, sometimes as well, we change examples with these webinars as well.
Oh, yes.
Am I correct in thinking, David, that the previous webinars should be available? So, for example, the ones from last session, because sometimes it can throw assessors, especially if you're new, a particular approach that, you know, these examples that we've used in here. So it might be in some of the other examples that it's a similar approach that you might use. That might be a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all the recordings are currently on the YouTube channel from the previous webinars. I think we've got about 3 Unit 1 recordings, and the 3 Unit 2 recordings all show on different learners' work.
And they'll all have different work, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Catherine, apologies, joined late. Can I access a recording? Yeah, those who are here, who have joined us, the link to the recording is going to be sent out. And also, as I mentioned, these will be added to the YouTube channel. Let's actually just go directly onto our YouTube channel here.
And also,
I'll show you where we have a.
Oh, sorry, David.
So, no, go ahead, Leslie. Go ahead.
Just while you're showing that page, because I'm sure we can see it as I ask this question. Just out of interest myself, for those who maybe didn't improve their understanding at this stage, you know, we are conscious that it's only been 1 hour, but please do contact your external quality assurers. And just out of interest, it'd be useful to know if anybody has had an EQA yet. And we do realise it's been a very different year. Usually by now, sort of approaching April, most centres would have had maybe at least one Unit 1 or Unit 2, depending on the order that you deliver those units, already banked. So you would have already had some sort of advice and guidance, you know, some feedback on the accuracy of your assessment decisions. So it's really important more than ever that you do make use of your external quality assurer, because they can advise you on specific units and your specific approach and the format and your type of learners, responses and things. So, you know, it really is important. If you haven't had any contact with them as yet, I would definitely do that as soon as possible, and at least maybe submit 1 unit for an external quality assurance remote visit, because there's no face-to-face visits at the moment, just to make sure you get that some reassurance and some feedback, and just get that discussion evolving.
And one of the things we do have here, we have different playlists. We have training for schools and vCerts, and I've tried to organize these and group different ones together to make it a bit easier to navigate. But I've put all the graphic design ones together. So I'll just scroll down this playlist a little bit here. Oh, there we go. So here you can see Unit 1 in graphic design, another Unit 1 from October 2019, one from February 2019, Unit 2 webinar from 2019. We will have another Unit 2 one going on. I'll add this Unit 3 one on here as well, but there are other webinars showing other examples of learners' work that you can have a look at. There has been question in here. There has been so much time lost. It is proving hard to catch up on units. Yes, I understand that, Georgina. This is where you will be able to submit teacher assessed grades for any incomplete units. So even if the units aren't fully completed, hopefully you'll have some evidence from classwork, homework, different things like that. There is some crossover as well between some of the learning outcomes from one unit to another, where you might be able to provide evidence such as Unit 2 and Unit 3. I think in Learning Outcome 2, they both talk about experimenting with the graphic design components, I believe. So there could be some crossover there where you might be able to use some evidence from, let's say, Unit 3 to help support Unit 2. So
Yeah,
there is,
I agree, David. I could say a little bit on that as well. Unit 2 and 3 tend to be the ones that are the best. I'm not going to say easiest, because some centres find them more difficult than others to combine 2 units into a project, and many centres like to deliver them separate, especially when they're new. But Unit 2 and 3 do work well quite together. So you could have the same assignment brief that targets the assessment criteria for Units 2 and 3. They do seem to work quite well, and again, that's really why you can talk to your external quality assurer. They'll give you some advice and guidance, how to do that. But we do realise, and especially Unit 3 is probably one of the ones that centres might be coming back face-to-face delivery now and trying to pick up. But do bear in mind that the teacher assessed grades are there as a backup. They're there to support you as well. It may be that you decide to put a teacher assessed grade in for Unit 3, but you may be able to complete Units 1 and 2. Again, every centre is at different stages, so it's quite hard to give a sort of a blanket response.
and as I mentioned, we should have the off-qual consultation, that framework, the VCRF, out. I think it's actually tomorrow. Someone in NCFE mentioned to me that it's actually going to be tomorrow. We're expecting it this week, definitely. We're hoping it might be tomorrow. The sooner we have it, the sooner we can make sure that we have everything in place to support teacher assessed grades, make sure everything matches the off-qual framework as it has to. And those webinars, as I showed you at the start on the COVID-19 response page, do sign up for them. They will definitely have the most recent information possible. And you might want to contact our customer support team as well to sign up to our COVID-19 emails that we send out, because those emails will go out before the webinars with any latest information. Doesn't seem to be any other questions coming through at this moment. I hope you have found this very useful, and I would like to thank Leslie as well for your support in going through all that learner work with us. So we'll close this webinar in about a minute. There will be an evaluation at the end. Would really appreciate if you'd brief evaluation, if you could fill that in. It'll help us to prepare for any other events or any other webinars that you may want done in the future. As I said, I hope you have found this useful, and please, from everyone at NCFE, do remain safe for the remainder of the year. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a good evening.